Hey, folks, welcome back to the OU Insider YouTube channel. This is Quick Slants as we continue our 2023 season preview game by game for Oklahoma this fall. And this week it's game number 2. The SMU Mustangs coming to Norman on the 9th of September. And for those that are Oklahoma recruitniks, what's interesting about this OU roster is that it's full of names that ought to be familiar. Kamar Wheaton, Jalen Knighton, Jordan Hudson, LJ Johnson, Preston Stone, all names that OU fans that follow recruiting in great detail will remember from years gone by as players that were either committed to Oklahoma or that Oklahoma had very high interest in. So with that as some backdrop for what this team, what this program is going to bring to town when they arrive at Owen Field, Jesse, when you look at SMU and how they match up with Oklahoma, what's to like and what's not to like?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, and we touched on it before we started recording, but I was going through just, kind of what they looked like last year, what the roster is this year, and they had a pretty sneakily good season last year. They had TCU on the ropes last year, narrowly lost that game. Finished with a 7-6 record, almost beat BYU in the bowl game. I think this is kind of an under the radar, pretty tough test for OU, particularly defensively. I think what I'm looking at for SMU is their offense. Now, obviously, Tanner Mordecai, also a name that OU fans are very familiar with, was really good for them last year. Not with the program this year, but you mentioned Preston Stone, guy that's a former 4-star prospect. I think chances are pretty likely he's going to be the starting quarterback. They're pretty high on him. He showed some things last year. I think, a lot of the top receivers from last year are back for them. Their leading running back is back for them. This is an SMU offense that averaged almost 38 points per game last year. So I think if I'm looking at this matchup in terms of how tough it could be for OU, I think week 2, this is going to be a pretty good measuring stick to see how much that OU defense really has improved.
Now, you mentioned Preston Stone, and gosh, I would have to fact check myself on this one, but I believe he is the highest rated recruit ever to sign with SMU out of high school in the modern recruiting era. And you look at the skill positions on offense and some names I already mentioned, former top 50 guys nationally, and Jordan Hudson, a one-time Oklahoma commit, Kamar Wheaton, a one-time, I don't know if you can really call him a commit, but one guy that at the very least flirted very heavily with Oklahoma for quite a while, former 5-star running back in the 2021 cycle, went to Alabama and now ends up at SMU. Jordan Hudson literally just announced his transfer from TCU to SMU a matter of days ago. And so those are two guys that bring some talent. LJ Johnson, another name I mentioned earlier at the running back position, as well as Jalen Knighton. Is it Keenan Hall, SMU's running backs coach, has really stacked his room full of guys that maybe they haven't been what everybody expected them to be at the collegiate level yet, but you look at their resume at the prep level, there's certainly talent there. It's just a matter of unlocking it. So Rhett Lashley, the head ball coach at SMU, he's got a track record as well, the former Miami offensive coordinator. He knows what he's doing. He can dial up an offense. And so especially with him at the helm of this program, I agree with you, Jesse. You're not going to get a romp over this SMU program. At least I don't think that should be the expectation. Now, are you worried about Oklahoma tripping up against an SMU program that they're going to be hosting in Norman in front of what promises to be a raucous home crowd? I don't necessarily know that I would go that far, but what you can say pretty unequivocally about this SMU team is that when you look at Oklahoma's 3 matchups over the course of non-conference play, Arkansas State, this game, and then, of course, the road trip to Tulsa, SMU is probably the team that offers the steepest challenge and the most ostensible talent, at least on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking about all the offensive talent they have, and they were really good offensively last year. I think they could still be as good offensively this coming year. Defensively, they were pretty poor last year. I know they've gotten some guys in the transfer portal, but I mean, defensively, they weren't very good, and they lost several of their top defensive players from last year. So I think obviously OU is going to have I think the talent advantage over SMU. But I think so. I mean, to your question earlier about, I mean, should there be an expectation that OU is going to trip up? I don't think so. But this does have shootout potential on it if OU, especially defensively, doesn't come into this game ready to go. So I think this is one of those games that, I mean, is SMU, I mean, obviously just 7-6 last year. They do pose some threats, but this should be a game that OU should come out ready to play, ready to put them away early, because if they don't, this could be a shootout in a hurry. It really could.
Well, you look back on last year, Jesse, and Oklahoma lost quite a few firefights to programs that, at least on paper, were less talented than they were. When you look at the Texas Tech game, when you look at the Kansas State game, the Baylor game. And so this is a program that in year one under Brent Venables demonstrated a certain vulnerability when the scores started to climb and it became a matter of who can set the pace and continue to establish it in an offense first football game. So if that's what it comes to, say you end up with a shootout between Oklahoma and SMU, you get apprehensive at all?
I would a little bit. I mean, the reality is, again, playing defense obviously is easier said than done. But I think you mentioned the coaching staff that SMU has, the players they're bringing in. I can tell you one thing: SMU is not going to be scared about coming into Oklahoma, and I mean they're going to come in looking to win. Now, again, OU should have the talent advantage, they should have the coaching advantage, all of that stuff. But I think the one thing you got to do if you're Oklahoma, the focus has got to be defensively. I don't think they're going to struggle to score against SMU, but this focus has got to be defensively. I think the worst thing you can do is let this SMU offense get in a rhythm and it still be a close, high-scoring game in the second half. That is where I would worry. This is a program that's trying to bounce back from last year. I don't think this is a game that could slip up, but at the same time, I do think that potential is slightly there. And the worst thing they could do is get in a shootout with an SMU offense that is going to feel confident and looking for a win, especially in the second half.
A key on either side of the football for Oklahoma, offensively and defensively, would be what if you're looking for a path to victory against SMU?
Yeah, I mean, I think what really drove SMU last year was their passing game. Now, obviously, they've got good running backs, but really it was Tanner Mordecai and that passing attack. Now, obviously, I know Rashee Rice, who was an incredible wide receiver for them last year, is no longer with the program. But that's really where they made their money, was the passing attack. I think Preston Stone is going to be a guy that's going to be able to step in and throw the ball around kind of like Tanner Mordecai did. So I think OU defensively, it's got to be limiting the passing attack, force them to run the ball. And then I think OU offensively, I mean, I really think it's going to be running the ball. It's going to be, which obviously long possessions was not a strength of OU last year. But I think if you're coming in trying to limit SMU's offense, OU's running game should get going. It needs to get going and sustain some drives, keep that SMU offense off the field.
And what's important to remember is that a high-scoring offensive football game, a performance in which Oklahoma puts 40, 50 points on the board, doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with prolific output in the passing game, as Oklahoma proved last year against Kansas, for instance. Sometimes you can rack up a ton of yards and a ton of points by running the ball effectively. And I think that's what it's got to be against a program like SMU that just isn't going to have the same talent up front as Oklahoma, because, again, we've talked about it. When you look at that SMU roster, they are skilled at the skill positions, but still a G5 program. And where you see the biggest discrepancy in talent between a Power 5 program and a Group of 5 program is in the trenches. So in order to blaze a trail to victory, Oklahoma is going to have to leverage that discrepancy. And that means controlling the flow of the game. That means running the ball effectively. And to kind of flip to the other side of the coin a little bit, that also means that you have to pressure the quarterback effectively. And you have to make Preston Stone make plays under duress. And if that happens and he can keep SMU in the game, you tip your hat to the kid. But he's going to be stepping into his first year as a starter. And if you make his life difficult in the pocket all day, that's going to be what is key defensively for Oklahoma to pick up a win against the Mustangs. So September 9th, SMU at Oklahoma. That's going to tie a bow on our preview of that football game. Next week, we'll dive into one of the more fun matchups that I can recall over the last several years, if only for the storylines that it's going to present. Brent Venables and Kevin Wilson, who once worked on the same staff together as coordinators, doing battle up in green country as Oklahoma goes on the road to face Tulsa. We'll look forward to breaking that game down with you in next week's installment of OU Insiders game-by-game preview of the 2023 season on the Quick Slants video series. For Jesse Crittenden, I'm Parker Thune. We'll see you next time.